I'm really delighted that we've got some great speakers who've joined us today to explore the role that Poplar Works and similar schemes can play as socio-economic drivers of place-based regeneration. We want to consider how fashion can be a force for regeneration, the opportunities for clustering to support innovation, and how fashion's movement towards more good growth approaches can aid local economic recovery. Before I introduce our brilliant speakers, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. So it'd be really great if you can keep yourselves on mute and if possible, keep your videos off. In the top right of your screen, you should be able to choose a speaker view or a gallery view to show you either the person speaking or our panelists. Be really great if you can use the chat box to introduce yourself, to share who you are, where you're from, any reflections, any useful links to other projects. I'm aware that we're joined by friends who are also developing amazing innovative programs in the area. And also any questions that you have for our panelists would be great in the chat box. Also, if you're on social media, if you can tweet at Poplar Works or hashtag Poplar Works birthday, we'd really love a bit of promotion. And finally, we're recording this event and we'd love to be able to share this with you, which we can do tomorrow. So just in terms of format, each speaker will present us with some initial thoughts and ideas. We'll have about half an hour for questions and discussion, and then there'll be some final thoughts from speakers before we wrap up for the day. So really delighted to be joined by Chris Paddock, Director of Place and Economy at PRD, Helen Lax, who's the Director of the Fashion District, Charles Armstrong, who's the founder and CEO of the Trampery, and Joe McCafferty, who's the director at Levitt Bernstein, and Joe is leading the redevelopment of the Aberfeldy area. So I'm conscious of time. Chris, would you like to give us some insight to start?
I'd love to. Happy birthday. I won't sing, much as I sort of feel compelled to. My name's Chris Paddock. I am a director of Place and Economy at a company called PRD. We're an economy and delivery specialist focusing very specifically on place and on localities. Lots of work relating to workspace, related to the evolution of very specific localities. And I've got sort of almost 20 years experience of working in these sorts of locations in East London. So by way of setting a bit of context, I'm just going to talk through some of the projects that we've worked on over the last couple of years that have relevance to the Poplar Works and to Poplar as an evolving place. And a lot of our work is very focused on value, how you get value out of things. That can be economic value, it can be commercial value, but also social value as well. So I want to sort of alight on a few of those principles as I go through and really celebrate Poplar Works in its context, because Poplar Works is a fantastic project which is already delivering significant value, and it's a good example of how putting in a bit of extra effort, doing things a bit differently, can start to yield something quite special. Because I'm sure Blossom would agree that there were probably easier ways of using this space than using these garages, but actually taking a punt on fashion is proving to be quite exciting, even in challenged times. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is really in the global context and in the context of something called the Thames Estuary Production Corridor. A few years ago, I, along with colleagues, worked on a project to develop a strategy for the Thames Estuary Production Corridor. And this is a plan to sort of create a world-class, globally significant region of creative production. So that includes fashion production, but lots of other things as well: digital, film, art, but also fashion. And this was always billed as a sort of big ticket, world-class project with world-changing ideas, creating tens of thousands of jobs, billions of value. And we were briefed to sort of start to think about, well, where do we put the film studios? Where are we going to put the big production houses? Where are we going to build the sets for London theatres? there's lots of that in there. There's lots of great, exciting stuff. But we started, as we dug into the project, to realise that the real value in a lot of these projects is actually where you've got the small, nascent creative sector that could become something incredibly special. So we identified various different locations across the Thames Estuary, some of which could accommodate the big ticket stuff, but other places where there were things that maybe were a little bit more surprising and a little bit more exciting. And Poplar was one of those places. We could see that there was bags of potential there. At the point that this strategy was written, Poplar Works was kind of in the planning phases, but had not opened yet. But we sort of started to see quite an interesting local network of creative potential, which we thought had something to contribute to this region that would operate on a global scale. So whilst it's easy to think of this in terms of its sort of local placemaking, it's actually quite a fundamental, if little bit quite small cog in a really important regional aspiration. So it's good for placemaking. If we can go on to the next slide, there was also a point in that strategy about culture at risk, that a lot of this stuff that drives London and the Southeast creative sector was at risk and could be lost, and that the supply chain was quite delicate. So there's a really important economic purpose for Poplar Works, and that's protecting the fashion supply chain within London. And it's very easy to be snobby about the fashion supply chain and say, well, it's all highfalutin fashion designers. Not the case. We did some evidence just looking at fashion shows and what fashion shows do for the economy. And we actually found that the supply chain for a fashion show or a fashion event was actually quite small in terms of the amount of creative, the amount of exposure to the creative supply chain. And we found that over half of the money spent in the production of that event, or even when you look at production of garments, is within the fashion sector or within the creative sector. It supports a lot of other activities within communities and within economies. So having something like this serves a purpose in terms of placemaking locally and globally, but also drives significant local value into a local economy. And in a nascent creative economy like Poplar, it's got the potential to be hugely valuable. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about was in relation to social value on the next slide. And this is a really important point, because the Thames Estuary production corridor where I started was all about sort of big ticket global innovation. But when we think about innovation is all about people being able to meet and people being able to do things. So to be able to deliver the sort of economic and commercial potential of the fashion sector within London, you need places where people can come together. And I think what Poplar Works has done incredibly well, and why it's such a great project, is it's balanced the sort of local social value of having local people exposed to new careers, to new training opportunities, to new community spaces, with the ability to bring together people to network and share ideas and become a fulcrum for the innovation within the fashion sector that Helen will go on to talk about in a second. And then absolutely critically, it plays a role in the social narrative of the place. This is Poplar Works. It's not anywhere else works. It's Poplar Works, and the fact that Poplar is there and is named and is kind of the fulcrum for this really important sexy sector in this huge region of global opportunity, I think is kind of absolutely fundamental to the story of the place going forward. So I'm going to hand over to someone a lot more fashionable than me now, Helen.
Thank you, Chris. So yes, I'm Helen Lax. I'm director of the Fashion District. And I kind of took over this thing called Fashion District, which is across 5 boroughs in East and North London. And one thing that we talked about as a panel before we planned this thing was why fashion? And I guess that gets us back right to the root of the community, because fashion in East and North London is what it's originally been known for. So the cultural roots and the heritage and the tradition of fashion is embedded in the communities within our 5 boroughs. And actually that is a starting point for growing the industry, but also regeneration. And And often, I suppose, people think of regeneration as a map, or as a scheme, or lines on a page, or models in some cases when you get across the table with you lovely architects. And they are those things, but I kind of think, well, you know, as Fashion District, we did have that map, we did have diagrams of different hexagons, and now our job is, because it's operational, is to lift that off the page and connect it with the real businesses and the real communities. And what ties them together, it happens to be fashion. The way I look at regeneration is 3D. I see it as a kind of, and please bear with me on this one, as a kind of digital ore that twists and turns in a beautiful manner. And you can actually go in to that ore, which is representing your area, in through many different doors. You might go in through the door of the community and want to need something out of it. You might go in the door of the business or a manufacturer, or, you know, industry, and want another thing out of it. Or you could be from the public sector with different people around you and want to generate the economic well-being, the place, bring alive a place. You might be about education or learning or social outcomes. But actually, if regeneration really sits properly within a place, it can do all those things over time. And from our point of view, fashion just happens to be the thing that's driving that. I guess my passion with regeneration has always been, make sure whatever you focus on is indigenous to that community. Otherwise, you'll have a much, much harder job in bringing them along with you, or indeed leading it. And that's what proper regeneration should be, really. It is tuning into what the people of that place would like and aspire to do, and supporting them do it. So if we think about Chris's Thames Estuary production corridor, which is a fantastic thing, and we think about my orbs along my digital orbs along that river, how fantastic that all those are turning rightly, I hope, in their communities. And actually, when you zone out, there are many together. Okay, so that's end of me being abstract. So what does fashion contribute to the locality within, or an industry contribute to a locality where regeneration is taking place? I think that the important thing is to think about how the new opportunities can connect people. So if you're creating a brand spanking new building or refurbishing a building, physically, it would be great if that could sit properly or nicely in place. If you've got the budget for an iconic building, then all the better. But at the same time, it's still got to be fit for purpose and brought alive by the activity that will happen within it. And only if it's sparked from that indigenous strength will it actually sit properly in place. So that's my plea, I suppose, to you planning people. So how can we do this? Even if the building's not iconic, it can absolutely be inspiration. So it doesn't have to be boring. It can inspire people that are working within it. It can be fit for purpose for the industry that sits within it. So with fashion, we need high ceilings, we need light, we need to hardwire the tech, we need electricity coming from the studio roof. And for community, it's great to have a good circulation and larger space that people can gather, because people will make that the engine of the building. And at the same time, that will attract local communities. If you can place learning programs and training up and opportunities for local people. I guess what I'm really saying is that by doing these things, you kind of help to build a sense of value from the building, so people want to be in it. There's a reason for them to go there, to have a cup of coffee, or to go to a training course. and at the same time, an industry can flourish. So yeah, nudging on that idea of innovation is also important to an industry, and thinking through not just what does the industry need now, but what does it need in the future. And at Fashion District, we are most definitely trying to tune into both the skills that are required for future that can emanate from buildings like Poplar Works, and also how tech can help to rethink what the fashion industry needs. Okay, so aware I'm running out of time, but there's two more little things to say. One is sometimes in industry, it is a point where there is a lot of challenge. And the challenge for the fashion industry at the moment is certainly around sustainable practice. And I think regeneration has a real role in this, because from the get-go, if your building has thought about those things that will help us with our environmental footprint, then that's a great start. And if the people running those, the buildings and the programs are helping to embed the values of sustainability within the businesses in it, then even better. So you get a cultural connection, which is through the theme of sustainability. Lastly, just really to point out that Poplar Works is a kind of ecosystem, I suppose, in itself. So it's deliberately designed so that businesses can do business together. They can create and make. They can use the manufacturing units, so that we can get more of a kind of ecosystem that's self-sustaining. But the really great thing, from my point of view, is that Poplar Works is one of several sites across Fashion District. And when a business, if we are supporting, when a business is able to grow and move on, we can point to somewhere else within the ecosystem of the Fashion District that we can hand them to. One of those places is the Trampery Fish Island Village. And the marvelous thing is the collaboration, I suppose, that went on from the very beginning, in terms of that longer term view of, okay, that's great, but what will the industry need in order to thrive across this area into the future? So I guess I need to stop, but it's really, I can pass now on to Charles Armstrong from the Trampery, who is responsible for Fish Island Village and also connected to Poplar Works, and most definitely has been a Fashion District partner right from the very get-go. So Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much, Helen. So yes, I'm Charles Armstrong, founder and chief executive of the Trampery. We're a social enterprise specialized in long-term workspace-led regeneration. The company was founded in 2009. And as Helen mentioned, we're responsible for the day-to-day management of Poplar Works, amongst other sites. So I guess the background for how we came into this is really that in the UK, and indeed in most wealthy economies, the entrepreneurial community is not at all representative of wider society, and it's a kind of dark secret of the entrepreneurial community that it's really dominated by people from relatively privileged backgrounds, and that's because those are the people whose families can afford to support them whilst they might not be earning much, developing a new business for a few years. They're likely to have entrepreneurial role models in their families. The family is likely to have all kinds of useful contacts they can introduce, and added to that, it's clear that there are systemic biases in the investment world and in other parts of society regarding gender and ethnic background. So the cards are really stacked against anybody who's got the talent of an entrepreneur but is in a disadvantaged or a low-income community. So from the Trampery's foundation in 2009, a big part of our mission as a social enterprise has been helping to rebalance that imbalance in society. And the reason that's important is because entrepreneurship is actually an incredible tool to help to counter hardship and marginalization in communities. That every single business that grows out of a community and is successful creates a cascade of benefits. It creates employment for people in that community. It creates role models that inspire other young people to consider the option of an entrepreneurial future. It builds up knowledge and experience that then becomes available to others in the community. It creates new networks that link that community with outside communities. And it starts to build up wealth that can then be invested in other ventures. So there's a disproportionate benefit from supporting entrepreneurs in lower income communities. And that's why the Trampery thinks it's important. And so over the last 12 years, we've developed, I suppose, quite a specific model for community entrepreneurship that has a number of different elements. First and foremost, providing a range of low-cost workspace options, and that means having something that is accessible for a single person who's just got the seed of an idea for a business, up to having something that could accommodate a team of 20 people that have got through the first few stages, that are growing, and their needs are quite different, obviously, at that point. But as well as the workspace, it means offering training that is helping entrepreneurs and businesses address the challenges that they face at different stages of growth, but is also helping the individuals to cope with the stresses and strains of running their own business. And I think that's something that we've seen very, very clearly over the last 12 months. A lot of the Trampery support has really been helping the individuals in our communities just to weather the storm and to stay sane in the face of very difficult situations. A third element is community building. One thing that we put a very strong emphasis on in all of the projects where we work is bringing people together. And you've heard this touched on both by Chris and Helen. It's incredibly valuable. The more that you can link people together and form friendships between them, then the more they support each other, the more psychological strength and resilience they have. And you're really creating a new foundation in a community that can sprout all kinds of seeds. And then finally, partnerships. That bringing in larger organizations, whether they're universities or public sector organizations or businesses, they have a lot to add to the situation. So this is a model that the Trampery's applied across multiple sites and sectors. Turning to fashion, we started looking at fashion very closely in 2012. It's a high value sector, as many of you will be aware. It's worth £26 billion annually at the moment, and it's growing. But unlike other high value sectors such as technology, it's uniquely democratic. The fashion industry, it creates employment opportunities at every different level of the skill ladder across design, across manufacturing and retail. And that accessibility makes it particularly valuable from the perspective of community entrepreneurship. And there's also another side to that immigrant communities typically have high fashion skills. So it provides a way that the newly arrived families can very rapidly start to enter the economy and to support themselves. So fashion is a very, very valuable sector from the point of view of regeneration. So I'm conscious that time's running out, so I'll be very brief in my final comments. Just to say, our first fashion project was the Trampery London Fields, which was 20,000 square feet that we opened in 2013. We were working with the London Borough of Hackney and the London College of Fashion on that one. And then on 2014, we started working with Peabody on the Fish Island Village project that Helen mentioned, which is 50,000 square feet that's just up the river in Hackney Wick. And we started working with Blossom and the team at Poplar HARCA in 2015 on Poplar Works. So I think each of those projects is designed to bring together a mix of local residents and small businesses from across London. And that cocktail is part of how you develop those networks. So looking to the future, what should the vision be? Well, it's a bit similar to Helen's orb in Chris's corridor, but I think what we really see is an archipelago of community fashion hubs in hotspots across London, spanning design facilities, manufacturing and technology, fashion tech facilities, but also with quite a range of training opportunities, access to investment, and help brokering links to suppliers and customers. And just to reinforce Helen's point, there's an incredible opportunity to embed values of sustainability, well-being, and social responsibility. And one of the elements that we're running at Fish Island Village is the Sustainable Fashion Accelerator with the support of LLDC that has really brought that to the fore, and hopefully is having a great impact. And I think it really needs to be Fashion District that is the glue that holds all of those different things together. And it's been a fantastic experience working with Helen and the team, really since Fashion District was a glimmer in the eye. And London's the first city in the world that's really set out to establish this kind of integrated platform for fashion businesses, because they do need a lot of different links in order to succeed. So that's really all from me. Happy birthday to Poplar Works, incredible marriage of policy, architecture, learning and entrepreneurship. And it's wonderful to be part of the project. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Jo McCafferty, who's the director of Levitt Bernstein.
Thank you so much, Charles. Gosh, what an inspirational lineup everybody's got today. What a great history of the Trampery. Really lovely to hear. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm an architect and working in Poplar, and particularly the Aberfeldy area of Poplar, and have been for the last 12 years. And it's been a complete privilege to be working in that community, and particularly with Poplar HARCA, with Blossom and the team at Accents, through the regeneration of this part of the east of the borough. So today, what I'd like to talk through really is both the success of the wonderful Poplar Works, and also what that's ignited across this part of the borough and the east side of the A12, and what that's leading to really in terms of our approach towards regeneration, and what that relatively small project has completely unlocked. So if we move on to the next slide. Some interesting things have happened with the text. Just in terms of what Poplar Works has unlocked, obviously designed by Adams and Sutherland Architects. It's an extraordinary initiative, which actually in its footprint and its scale of building is really quite tiny, but it just shows the importance of both what's led to Poplar Works as a project and what sits behind it, the importance of that process of bringing those stakeholders together, and as Helen quite rightly said earlier, really getting under the skin of an area and really understanding what very bespoke initiatives will blossom in that community with regard to enterprise. But also the physical presence of these buildings, the Poplar Works buildings, which obviously I very much appreciate as an architect, bring to that local existing community in terms of the residential community. So they are really small buildings, but they have completely unlocked the environment to the east side of the A12. What once was kind of swarmed and kind of dominated by the noise of traffic actually has become a much quieter idyll. It protects the residential, and it also activates and brings an incredible sort of amount of activity along that kind of very linear route along the A12, very much for the best benefit of the existing residents, but also that activity at different times of the day and night. So very obvious things to say, but actually it's had a transformational effect on the Nairn Street estate that sits to the east of these buildings. and in terms of our thinking and in terms of the thinking of the community that have lived through this transformation and are just facing the next, actually has unlocked thinking in terms of what might be possible moving forward. So next slide, please. So expanding that red line. It's really important. I'm sure a lot of the architects and everybody on this call today sees very much this sort of importance of looking beyond the red line with regard to any project or any initiative, and thinking about the wider area physically in terms of its built environment, socially in terms of its community. But this diagram, really, this aerial view, just shows our red line and the Poplar Works initiative in terms of its scale to the north, as you see on the west side of the Nairn Street estate. And actually, the initiative of Poplar Works has really expanded our red line across the whole of the master plan. So for those that know it, you can see the sort of two routes, the A12 to the north and the Blackwall Tunnel to the south, and the A13 crossing east-west across the site. I think a lot of people on this call know the site very well. The Nairn Street estate sits to the east of Poplar Works, there in yellow. And then the Aberfeldy estate sits to the south, and it's very much divided by this connection to the A12 corridor and the underpass there linking through. But you can sort of see this area as a complete patchwork of different scales of development at different times. And we originally started in Aberfeldy to the south and looked at pretty much sort of holistically, you know, in essence, a sort of very much housing-led regeneration project with very small pockets of community functions which are expanding by the day, but very much led by housing. And now what's been unlocked as a result of the Poplar Works project to the north is a real view about actually the importance of enterprise within this area and how we can really continue to rebuild this new industry of poplar in a very different way. So next slide, please. Next slide. So as Blossom mentioned originally, sorry, that's on. Next slide, yeah. Thank you. It's incredibly important to involve everybody in the process, and Poplar HARCA particularly are incredibly good at knowing their community. But we have very much been involved in embracing and getting very stuck into understanding the community and involving everybody through the dialogue of what might make this new neighbourhood. This diagram, a series of photographs, shows you the level of engagement we've gone to through lockdown, in fact, where a big planning for real exercise happened. And there were lots of kind of WhatsApp movies of local residents and people in the neighbourhood talking about their local environment and what they might want to see as part of this new master plan. And enterprise, workspace, training space, education space was very much a very strong message coming back from the community in terms of what people wanted to see on their doorstep. Next slide, please. And part of that has also been not only the longer term initiatives that have happened in the area and kind of unlocked that conversation, but also the short term, the meanwhile initiatives that have included these fantastic works to Aberfeldy High Street, which is a historic Victorian high street, which snakes up from the south to the north from the A13. And these meanwhile works by Yanketeen and also Meanwhile Space included and involved the upgrading of these shop fronts. But it's so much more than just a project that's about a coat of paint. It's so much deeper and more important than that. And the time that team took in building this project and creating this project has again unlocked a completely different conversation than I think we would have had 10 years ago about the nature of that high street, the role of enterprise serving that retail and serving that high street, and the shifting nature of the community over the last 30 years when some of these buildings were first built. So this fantastic transformation of the high street with colour and pattern actually has a whole raft of consultation engagement that sits behind it in terms of talking to local businesses, understanding what they see their role is within the local community, where they would like to be in this new master plan, and what business support we can all provide as a team to get them there. Next slide, please. So the patchwork of Aberfeldy, you can see from this really simple drawing, talks about the nature and character of some of the buildings and spaces that sit both around and to the south of Poplar Works. And that includes the seminal building of Balfron Tower to the west side of the A12, as you can see there. The Poplar Works buildings themselves that are part of the new architecture of this place. The Bromley Hall School, which is this incredibly inventive seminal school building, which sits to the north of Poplar Works, is listed and was very much kind of inventive in its time, talking about how you give pupils and children access to open space through learning. And there are other closer and kind of finer landmarks, including that of St Nicholas's Church, and this amazing transformation in the meanwhile of the High Street, and the first 3 phases of the transformation of Aberfeldy that have happened over the past 10 years, including this amazing linear park that stretches east to west parallel to the A13, and it means children aren't walking next to the A13 home after school every day. Next slide, please. So as part of this process, and it feels important to talk about this in terms of the context of regeneration and the infusing of enterprise and training and education within that regeneration. But we've done a huge amount of youth engagement with ZCD architects, talking to Langdon Park school teenagers, talking to Culloden Primary School, which is actually in our red line officially now. And it's just very important to place children and young people and teenagers particularly at the heart of this regeneration process. They so often are completely and utterly invisible in talking about the built environment. And it's been transformational in terms of their input within this master plan that we're creating. And thinking now about some of the things that Helen mentioned about those stepping stones from school into college, into enterprise, and how through these conversations we're fostering now with young people, the exposure we then give them to Poplar Works and the possibilities in this new locale, which is surrounding them in terms of their day-to-day lives. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot with these young people about their lived experience and gone on tours across the master plan and their local area, really talking to them about how they feel things could improve, what they like, what they don't like in their local area, and why, where they feel safe walking, where they don't feel safe, and what opportunities they might want to see on their doorstep. Next slide, please. And out of that, they've built their own manifesto, this extraordinary document, which is written by the young people and talks very much about their aspirations for their local area. And that they're using to test us and refer back to with regard to our master plan. So they're analysing and critiquing our master plan and testing to see whether it delivers these things that they so desperately need. Next slide, please. So finally, that leads us to the threads of the master plan, which are very much woven from this extraordinary patchwork of Aberfeldy in the Nairn Street estate, and one might say some sort of cantha in terms of how these parcels are stitched together with these different fabrics, built fabrics. And what we are really trying to do here is bring the success of Poplar Works and draw that south, so that's the yellow line on the plan, recreate and build on the success of the meanwhile works of the High Street, that's that sort of pink line there, and bring that north, and create an extraordinary blue line of family housing that sits between those two in this sort of car-free route. And And part of that, the sort of nexus of that, is this green east-west cross routes, which is so much been driven by the youth engagement process that we've been through, but is looking to really unlock routes for pedestrians and cyclists that finally and for the first time really stitch this part of East Poplar together with West Poplar through the transformation of an existing underpass into something entirely different for cyclists and pedestrians. And alongside that, we want to loop people through to the river. You wouldn't believe it, but those that are working in Aberfeldy and those at school in Aberfeldy often don't even know that the river exists or is so close, because they can't physically and easily and safely get to it. So what we are looking to do through this master plan is completely unlock that connection, and through the work of St William alongside the river and the creation of new Poplar Riverside Park there across the river, and linking that back to our transformation of Abbott Road and the Green Street and the rest of the master plan, really unlock that connection for the whole of Poplar, not just Aberfeldy. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over.
Thank you, Jo, and thanks to all our fantastic speakers. Goodness, orbs and corridors and archipelagos and loops. There's so much to get into, I would love if people have questions to post in the chat box. We don't have a huge amount of time, but I guess to start with, I'm really you're all touching on very different aspects of things which come back to a focus on people and on neighbourhoods. And I think you know, one of the things in certainly the development of Poplar Works was very much about the concept of a people pipeline. So you know, we've talked about the workspace pipeline and what that does, but where there are kind of opportunities in this work to almost develop the people in neighbourhoods or the people in places. And I guess I'm interested in your observations on the challenges of that, particularly at this time when we're still in a fairly uncertain time in terms of what that might mean for the economy and for business.
Shall I help you out, Blossom? Remember to unmute. So I actually thought about challenges that one has when one brings programs together with different partners, and especially, as you pointed out, in our times coming out of lockdown and hopefully not going into another one. And quite often people can get very entrenched, I suppose, in doing their own thing that they are responsible for. And the beauty of Poplar Works so far, and working with partners across the fashion district, is it works best when, you know, it's not rocket science, when people collaborate, so that where programs can collide and you do one thing well and you make sure that you bring impact by doing that one thing as partners, that's when you have the quickest results and most traction. And I've had experience of both, where, you know, partners come together and it works like Cinderella with the fairy dust, and other times where things can take such a long time because people are working independently, and that's not great to bring the people pipeline along, because the people that are losing out are those that aren't getting the opportunities. So I think that is one major challenge. There is, I don't know if anybody agrees with me on that one, but
maybe if I can pick up on that, because I think it's definitely been one of the most distinctive characteristics of the project, that that everybody's rolled their sleeves up and tried to find shared solutions. I think the reality of the project is that it was at the boundary of possibility that imposes particular challenges of its own, that it wasn't, there was no element of the project that was easy to realize. And Blossom, you know that better than anybody. And so the only way that it could get realized was by the different organizations coming together and looking at the bigger picture rather than just the bit that they were going to be responsible for. But I suppose the other thing that occurred to me when you raised that point of the people pipeline, looking back, I think the fact that the first thing that went live on the site was the Making for Change program that the London College of Fashion was running. And it was immediately offering something extraordinary to members of the local community who probably weren't being prioritized for employment training in conventional forms. That just sent such a strong signal about who the project was for and the kind of engagement that it was going to have, because that was a very bold thing for the London College of Fashion to do. And I think the success of that helped to build that people pipeline and very quickly remove any skepticism or doubts or anxieties that people in the community might have had, whether this was really a project for them or whether it was actually a sly gentrification project that was going to benefit completely different people. So I think that in terms of that pipeline, a lot of that pipeline is about trust. And Poplar Works has been very successful in establishing trust from the beginning and making sure that its agenda was translated into practice.
Super.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Charles. It's essential that people, to build a people pipeline, people have to understand what's in it for them. And by providing tasters, I suppose, tasters that not everybody wants to get involved in the thing that you are offering, but tasters to get involved, to skill up, to develop their knowledge or to support what they're already doing is a really important thing in a community. And then the people will come out, won't they? They'll find you rather than you finding them. And balancing up the kind of retention of talent in an area with the ability also to attract it, to pull it in, because balancing that means that you've got a real communication and USP, I suppose, and you're doing your thing. You're working in the vertical, the local to global suddenly works.
Absolutely. Chris, did you have a point on this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a wider point, but related, I think, in the population in this area are like a significant proportion of that population are going to be the people who are going to be hardest hit by the impacts of the pandemic and the downturn or the recession, whatever that becomes in the coming years. And I think it's fair to say that having a project which is well thought out, well researched, and has a level of sort of specific integrity above just having a general workspace and employment brokerage program is going to be incredibly valuable going forward. So I think, you know, it's incredibly important to have that, and I think this is why Poplar Works is a good example to be celebrated, because it feels more resilient in the position that we're in now in terms of the impact it's going to have on people's lives at an incredibly difficult, very incredibly difficult period. Whilst I'm talking, Shahi, hi Shahi, asked a question about how do you turn social value into pounds. So I'm not sure whether that is how do you value social value projects, or how do you turn it into commercial value. Both of them worthy of a PhD thesis in their own right. There are loads of great tools to sort of quantify social value and sort of put a monetary value on that. The best one, I think, is probably Hacked social value calculator, which you can Google. It's pretty good. I always, when I'm asked about this, I always tell people to be careful about trying to put a value on everything, because often the real value in terms of the more sort of integral value or even the future commercial value comes from the sort of embedding of the narrative, soft power, and things that you can't really put a commercial value on at an early stage. So I think There's lots of great ways where you can say, you know, we deliver this much workspace, we deliver apprenticeships, voluntary time, and we can value that. But I think you also always have to have an eye on the sort of wider narrative alongside that, and not be held too much of a slave to the sort of pounds and pence that can fall out of all of this.
Perfect. I'm super conscious of time, so I'm going to move on if that's okay. So there's a few questions in the chat, which is really great. Stephen and John have, I think, related questions. So one, so Stephen's asking about linking the past with the present with the future, which is really crucial. And John is just asking about our experience of the kind of local versus London versus kind of further afield in terms of tenants, and importantly about the cafe and who that is providing for. And I'm really delighted that the cafe is being run by a few local people from Aberfeldy. They live just off the high street, and it's very much a community resource. So the cafe opened in August, and what was brilliant immediately was almost in the same way as the Making for Change programme coming in was a real demonstrator of the intent of Poplar Works. It was brilliant because it just meant that community members were coming in left, right and centre, and that felt incredibly important in terms of that mixing of the kind of fashion and the economic with the community in a really subtle way, which was just about simply people being next to each other, and then that kind of exposure to each other that we don't often get. And others will have a view, but I guess on the kind of heritage point, we were very clear in the development of Poplar Works that this was about reflecting, as Helen describes, that kind of what's going on in the community now, but also reflecting on what's been happening over the last, hundreds of years. Fashion in the East End has been around for 250 years. I remember a lot of door knocking and having conversations with people who said, look, my granny worked in Brick Lane in one of the factories. My uncle kind of works, I've been a machinist, I'd love to share my skills. And those were the stories we were hearing on the doorstep. And I think so much of what the work's about now is about how do we continue to embed that and look at where those opportunities are within the industry moving forward.
Blossom, can I add to that?
I know you've got to go, but yes, please do.
Yeah, I just absolutely reinforce that. I think there is no shortcut to understanding an area's history, both its social and its physical history. I think it's obviously about doing research and poring over historic maps and visiting buildings and getting a real sense of how the fabric of a place has changed over time. But it's also about those conversations, Blossom, that you so well describe. And there's no shortcut for that. I think we're hoping to open a kind of new design resource on Aberfeldy High Street where we're very present and those conversations can be had. We're having lots of discussions with the neighbourhood at the moment, kind of monthly meetings where very small pieces of information are kind of shared that have a huge impact. The fact that there used to be historic butchers on the high street, the fact that as you say, Blossom, people's history was very much in textiles, and very specific kind of feedback just can transform a project, or the conversations we're having with it through the youth engagement about people's current skills and interests in terms of career development. So I think you can't circumvent that. That's got to be at the core of any regeneration process, and the multi-layered layered nature of that, the deepest that you can create is going to bear the most fruit. So, digital conversations, being there, online, phone calls, mail drops, at every level, which Poplar HARCA is and the accents team is very well versed in, but it's absolutely crucial.
And if I could very quickly pick up John's question. Originally, when we were designing the project, we were targeting a 50-50 split between local community residents and small businesses more broadly from across London. Right now, we're actually about 60% local and 40% from wider London. So like, we're very happy if the balance skews that way, but we'll continue operating it with a very careful attention to maintaining that mix. Because obviously some of the people who have come into studios from outside of the area are really significant figures in the UK's fashion community, and they've brought a kind of energy and access to wider networks that is now benefiting all of the locals. So it can be quite a difficult cocktail to maintain, but so long as you curate it well and you're doing a good job with the community building so that the relationships are forming, it really achieves miracles.
I totally agree with that one, Charles, because whilst you absolutely want to project forward, I suppose, the tradition and the culture of a place, you also can't pickle it. So, and it will move forward because time moves on and those communities move on, whether you were there or not. So all you can do is kind of curate that together. And my belief is by attracting people in and making sure that you have moved programs forward at the same rate. So attracting new people in and to work with people there is an important thing too, because those collaborations inform both people. They inform those designers or fashion businesses that are currently already established, and it also informs people that are emerging from the local area. But I guess the tension comes, I sound like Mrs. Doom and Gloom today, but the challenge, the tension, but the tension tends to come when things don't move at the same rate. One thing moves before the other, and therefore you get that kind of rub. But if you start right at the beginning in trying to take people with you and showing what value to them the place will give, then you're more likely to have success. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Helen, time flies when you're having a birthday party, and so we have no time left, which is disappointing because there's so many interesting questions. We're recording this, so I think that we will be able to maybe follow up with specific questions in terms of responses. What would be amazing is maybe a 1 word or 3 words maybe of the kind of key ingredients for those of us thinking about future developments and why we might want to use fashion or other sector-led approaches. The kind of, what's the thing that makes it work in 1 word, being very mean. Helen.
Collaboration. Yeah.
Super. Chris.
Patience.
Very good. Joe.
Listening, I think.
Wonderful. Charles.
3 words: create new symbols.
That's cheating.
Wow. Up to 3. Goodness. All of those. Massively important. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you all so much for coming along today and spending an hour with us. Lots of exciting things to come. So do keep in touch, and yeah, I'm sure we'll see you all very soon. But yes, happy birthday, Poplar Works. That feels like the note to end on. Good. Thanks all.